bosses fired me because of a headline I published in March. The background for it is that there was a demonstration in downtown Manhattan on Wall Street by about 50,000 Haredi against the IDF draft. And I got really angry, and sometimes when I'm angry, I do my best work. And the headline that I chose for my article, which was actually a benign critique of that demonstration, was 50,000 Haredim demonstrate so that other people will die for them. Good. That's a tough one. It's true. So, considering the fact that some of the advertisers of the Jewish press in print include Art Scroll and some fundraisers for Haredi yeshivas, you'd understand why the sponsors wanted my head, and it was delivered to them within 6 hours, and I was fired. Yes. A phone call that I got from a friend of mine from Shul, also an Anglo. He said, you know, we all knew that we're going to fire you. The question was if it was going to be over some outrageous headline or over embezzlement. You got away with the headline. Across the Suez Canal, I was in Fayid with the Arik Sharon forces. I was there, I was part of the war. Last day of the war, I think it was the 17th day, and there was going to be a ceasefire. It was going to be a ceasefire at 7 p.m. We were in a place called Tassa, a base that had some Air Force and some infantry in the northern Sinai. We were going to give a show around 8 o'clock. Everybody knew it was going to be a ceasefire at 7, 8 o'clock the show. We were getting ready in our room, taking showers. Nobody told us that traditionally armies, warring armies, before a ceasefire, use the last half hour or so to really let out their artillery on each other, trying to get the last chance to hurt each other. And so here we are, on the base, it's October, it gets dark early, and suddenly, 7 o'clock, all the lights go out, and there's a siren ringing through the base. Everybody on base knew where the shelters were, and they ran there, but we didn't. And so we were outside, all exposed, under an artillery barrage. This is an experience, if you speak to experienced soldiers, that is the scariest experience. You're as close to death as you can get without being critically wounded. You hear the exit, it goes, and then there's a bit of silence and kaboom, and there's nothing you can do, nothing. It's really the luck of the draw. You're entirely in the hands of God. And 4 or 5 of us were running in the dark. We were aware of one another, yelling to each other, and we found this shelter, this something that looked like we could hide behind it. It gave some shadow, and we hid under it and just waited it to be over. And it was over. And the next day, I walked by that spot, and it was what's known as Utah fabric, like a sackcloth. It had a slogan on it, Chayal HaMachaneu Shelcha Shmor Al Nikyono. Soldier, the camp, it's your camp, keep it clean. We had a neighbor parked next to us, Abi Natan. So he was doing Kol HaShalom, the voice of peace. And we were doing, well, not the opposite, not the voice of war, but we were doing, a national religious broadcast. In November, it was a huge storm. And in a storm like that, you can't lay anchor. You have to keep moving. And so we pulled anchor, and we did the term pull? Anybody here from the Navy? We lifted the anchor and we weighed anchor. No, weighed anchor is the other way. Okay. We did things with the anchor, and then and then we went. We had to keep going up and down the coast to weather the storm. But we had a 1967 model boat. Abi's was 1948. He couldn't even do that. He had to go into dock in Ashdod. I'm sitting the next day after the storm. We repositioned ourselves, and I'm doing the morning show. And I get a phone call in the studio. It's Abi Natan. And I say, "Hi, Abi, you know I'm a great admirer." And he says, "Listen, you're in my spot." So in this huge Mediterranean, it turns out that his engineers found the spot for him where he would get the optimal coverage for his signal. And so I had to run to the captain and tell him that we had to move out of Abi's spot. I was hired by an outfit called Israel Shelanu. Israel Shelanu was run by a man named Shmuel Shmueli, a Hasidic, a Lubavitcher, not familiar with all the Ten Commandments. So, well, the one about bouncing checks. So, but it was a heady time because I discovered that there was an audience out there that really liked my stuff. I had a column called In America with an ayin in the end, the Yiddish version of the word. And I had like 50,000, 60,000 followers, which in pre-internet terms was enormous. And then Yediot Achronot, the American supplement of Yediot, stole me. The pay was good, checks didn't bounce, and then I got fired. And I got fired
Seems to be
because of my big mouth. Yes, a pattern emerges. As you recall, 1995, there was the infamous murder of Yitzhak Rabin. Now, on the Shabbat when Rabin was murdered, I was in shul, a Hasidic shul on the Lower East Side. Boyaner Hasidim, really lovely people, repugnant politics. You don't talk to them. I had a friend who said, "I only listen to what they say in Yiddish. When they switch to English, I'm not interested." And so it was afternoon, it was actually Shalosh Shudis, the third meal, when the news came that Rabin was shot. We didn't know that he was killed yet. And a very nice man sitting next to me turned to me and said, smiling, "Well, you know, in this shul, nobody is going to say Tehillim for him."
Wow.
Which is why I took out immediately a Sefer Tehillim and started saying Tehillim, because somebody had to.
Right.
And then I wrote an article assessing Rabin on a very personal level and on a political level. I told the story about saying Tehillim for him. I touched on the fact that he was really the fair-haired child of the Palmach generation. That picture with him and Yigal Alon in Gaza, in the desert, this is it. This was the war. These were the beautiful sons and daughters sacrificing themselves, making a state. But there was also a political vacuum there. The man was a technocrat. He was a reflection of the person he served. When he worked for Ben Gurion, it was the Holy Cannon and shooting at the Altalena. When he worked for Eshkol, he was the chief of staff and he was very good at it. When he worked for Golda, he did Golda politics. When he worked for Yitzhak Shamir, he was the most right-wing, even viciously so, Minister of Defense. There was no real Rabin there, and this is also something that I wrote. I wrote that in fairness, Rabin, if you were to weigh him as he was, would have disappeared naturally like so many other Israeli politicians, perhaps with a few nice footnotes about the Gaza picture with Yigal Allon and things like that. And because of this idiot, Yigal Amir, Rabin now received eternal fame. And I wrote that too. Now, I didn't write it after the murder. I didn't publish it after the murder. I waited until after the Shloshim. I'm not rude. I'm not a bully. I wrote, I waited the appropriate time and then had it published. But it turned out that the ceremony to commemorate Rabin at Madison Square Garden was not on the Shloshim, but on the 40th day. And so that event with the huge, enormous picture of Rabin from the top of Madison Square Garden to the bottom, that reminded everybody of Soviet funerals. That was on the 40th day. And the Almana, Mrs. Rabin, the late Mrs. Rabin now, was there, Leah. And somebody made sure that she saw my article. And she didn't go to my editor. She didn't go to my publisher in New York. She called directly to Noni Moses in Tel Aviv, and I was out on my behind. I went and started begging them to hire me. I had a job at the time, so it's not like I was unemployed. But I said to them, you need me to come out of the quagmire of what was going on, because the Lubavitch reputation at the time was really in the dumps. They were considered almost non-Jewish. People were poking fun at them for being the closest religion to Judaism and things like that. And so I was finally hired as editor of LNS, the Lubavitch News Service. And with very, very disciplined work, this was the first opportunity for me in my entire career to work for a client and not concentrate on my feelings at all. There was a mission statement. The mission statement was to mainstream Lubavitch in the public mind. That was it. And so we produced stories based on the AP formula, where you have the opener and you work for, down the first 5 paragraphs. You serve the busy editor, the lazy editor. You produce stories that are completely professional. You run them through 4 and 5 proof and editing processes, and you don't necessarily get your story picked up. It's even better if the New York Times gets your story and sends a reporter to do their own coverage, and so on. There was a set of rules to the game, and I learned a lot. And I also conceived, it really is my brainchild. It looks very different today, but I had in mind this hyperlinked image of the world map, where wherever you touch, you would get the Chabad house in that part of the globe. And I sold them on it. And then I was hired by the Reform movement. They had about 10 versions of prayer books, and they wanted to consolidate them into one version. And they hired me as a designer, but eventually they started relying on my Jewish knowledge. There was a meeting which renewed my faith in the Reform movement, of all things. It was an editorial meeting, and we were discussing the Amidah, the Shmoneh Esrei, the silent prayer. And one of the editors, a nice lady rabbi, said that she wanted to add a blessing to the Shmoneh Esrei for our suffering gay brothers and sisters. Yeah, and I said, "Oya Bruch." Just like that. How am I justifying this to my Rebbe? And, but I waited, I didn't say anything. And the guy running the meeting renewed my faith in the reform movement being still part of the rabbinic umbrella. He said, "Okay, we'll consider it. Find me a pasuk." That's what he said. "Bring me a verse. Bring me something from scripture that we could include in the blessing." This was, on its face, a very technical kind of thing, but it was really very deep. In other words, if you can find something that directly supports this, a blessing for suffering gay brothers and sisters, we'll include it, but it has to come from within the tradition. And I loved it. I founded a local publication in 2004 called the Grand Street News. And for the first time, I became publisher and editor of my own thing and started to work in an area that was brand new to me. I was always doing global stuff and major Jewish stuff and institutional stuff. And here I was covering my neighborhood. So the first change was that I couldn't say a bad thing about anybody because I would see them on the sidewalk the next day. I couldn't start fights. I couldn't be belligerent. I had to be nice. I had 8 years of nice. Coming here could be a tough aliyah. I've heard of people who kept on struggling for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Ours was a charmed aliyah, really charmed. Most important, I got a job right away with the Jewish press. So I became the senior editor of the Jewish press, which brings us to the end of the story. And after I got fired, I started my own online publication called The Jewish Independent, where we kind of try to develop it slowly. It'll take a couple of years. We are dedicated to writing unusual stuff. I'm having the best time of my life. And I love Netanya, cleanest, finest city in Israel. I have an idea about Netanya, by the way, and maybe I'll end with that. We have the longest, most beautiful shore, city shore in Israel. And we are also the crime capital of Israel. My idea is to turn Netanya into the Tashlich Center. Because when you come and you rid yourself of your sins, they don't go to waste. You recycle them.